In here.
Testing. Can you guys hear me?
That works.
Okay, awesome. These AirPods have a mind of their own,
Yeah,
I tell you.
I know the feeling.
Hi, Gail.
Hey
Swapnil,
there.
hello.
Just setting myself up.
Awesome. If you're new to the weekly session here, there's an online question board which I use to manage questions. I'll pop it into the chat here. And I'll pop it into the chat several times because apparently people that joined, they're not able to see past chat history. Hey, Ram.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Also, I want to give a little plug for a friend of mine who does extensive coaching for job seekers. He's hosting a free workshop, like a 2.5-hour workshop, May 23rd. I'll just pop this into the Slack channel, the chat channel there, if you guys are interested. Hi, Tim.
So,
Hello, Anne-Marie. I wish these chat messages would be persistent for people that are joining. Anyway, feel free to drop any questions into that online question board. Hello, everybody. All right.
yeah, you would think Zoom will improve, after all the money they made. These are all basic things.
It seems like a pretty easy toggle to toggle on
Yeah.
and off if you wanted to, but I don't know. Or at least a way to make it, to pin it or make it sticky. I don't know. Okay, we'll work with it. All right. How's everyone doing today? Thumbs up? Yeah? All right. Well, is there anyone new here that hasn't joined us before?
Yeah, this is Doug. I'm new.
Doug, you're new. Tim, you're new. Okay, I'll give the quick spiel here. I do this once a week, 30 minutes. It's really based on the premise of, shedding some light on that black box of the process, which is recruiting, interview processes, where your resume goes after you submit it into that black box. I'm trying to shed some light on that with the premise that a little bit of information can go a long way as far as insight into the process, and furthering your job search and helping you navigate the job search more effectively. And so that's the whole premise of this. I don't charge for this. I'm part of the NSA community and have been for the past 9 months or so. Not necessarily as a job seeker, initially as a job seeker, but then I just transitioned to moderating and helping out. So I'm familiar with the playbook that Phil Terry prescribes in his book. About me, I've been recruiting now for the past 11 years, primarily for venture-backed startup and growth companies. Prior to my recruiting career, I was in software product development. My early days, I was coding, then I was consulting, and then I got into product management. And then I somehow became a recruiter, go figure. But now everything's coming full circle now, and I'm starting a AI automation agency and riding this wave that is AI. And let me just paste this once more because I know there's some folks that joined. Please check out the chat, and if you could, let's use that question board to manage the questions here that come in. Or if you're so bold as to just holler out the question, I'm happy to do it that way too, unless it gets too crazy. So that's a little bit about me. I don't really prepare for this stuff. I'm just here to kind of answer questions and foster some conversation. I'm really high on AI. You know, I'm always curious about how job seekers are starting to integrate that into their search, but also integrating that into how they think about how their role or their profession might evolve as a function of AI. So I'm happy to explore that and talk about that as well. But I'm here for you guys, so the floor is yours if you want to just drop some questions into that job board. I see one question there now. How do recruiters treat referrals from candidates who turn down an opportunity? i.e., if I do not pursue an opportunity you present as a recruiter, but I recommend someone else, do you reach out to them? Personally, I do. Right? If I'm engaged with someone that I think is a strong fit, and they're, for whatever reason, they're not available and they refer someone else to me, it's a nice starting point, especially if I've worked with that candidate, you know, somewhat extensively. Then I start to take the referrals much more seriously. And so yeah, I think the simple answer is yes, I do. I can't speak for all recruiters, but I would figure that, especially now when a lot of recruiters are inundated, they're looking for any way to kind of differentiate among their stack of 300 resumes for a given role. All right. Anyone else have any questions?
Hey,
Explore?
Eric, quick question for you.
Yeah.
I saw that I believe there is a message regarding a free workshop coming up.
Yes.
Sprout. Yeah. Can you explain that a little bit? Actually, that'd be great.
So yeah, Gaurav is a friend of mine, associate. He's here, I think he's here in Utah. I live in Utah. And he's just doing like a 2.5 hour workshop. My understanding is that it's free. You can register. And he's just going to walk through his playbook. He deals mostly with folks that are more senior in their career. A lot of tech, folks in a lot of tech.
Okay.
And so it feels like there's a lot of overlap, but low risk, no pressure.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah, I'm I was a engineering director. Actually, I headed up commerce platform at a lot of company Unities. It seems like it might be a good workshop for me then. If he's
check it out.
Tech leadership.
Yeah, check it out. And if you check it out, I'd love to hear back from you of how it went. I haven't sat through any of Gaurav's workshops yet, but I'd love to hear any feedback.
Oh, sure. I'll give you a readout actually after next week. I'll definitely attend. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, cool. I got another question here on the job board. On the question board. Do you suggest to have a few different resumes for certain jobs you apply for, e.g. UX designer, UX researcher, visual designer? I mean, this is I mean, you want to have a resume that's tailored for what you're looking for, right? But if you're looking for 3 different things that are orthogonal, right? If they're completely different or just somewhat adjacent, you might want to question, how focused you are, how focused is your candidate market fit statement? Because the more focused you are, again, counterintuitively, you might feel like you're excluding yourself from opportunities. But I mean, sort of the consensus has been if you focus more, you'll reveal more opportunities. And simply because your personal brand is more focused, your ability to speak to what you're looking for is focused. When you're talking to anyone like recruiters or people in your network, it's hyper focused, then they know what you stand for. But if you stand for 2 things or 3 things, it can get really confusing really quick to anybody you interact with. And so, yeah, that's just my comment there.
Yeah, I just got some feedback on my listening tour. It was actually from a recruiter, and I have background in graphic design and digital marketing. He suggested having 3 different resumes because I'm transitioning into UX. So that's how he saw me in the candidate right now, to like kind of leverage my background, because UX, the industry is so tough to get into. So, and then like catering my CMF accordingly. But then I feel like it kind of gets confusing too.
Yeah, in my experience, Emery, people that are calling themselves designers versus UX researchers, like UX researchers, in my experience, are very different from UX designers. And especially if you're just jumping into UX, to sort of specialize in a slice of UX or multiple slices of UX might be challenging. So
Yeah, that was just an example. I'm more on the design side than research, but
okay,
yeah, basically it was graphic design or UX design or
yeah,
digital marketing. So, but you suggest kind of keeping that narrow focus like the book.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And one thing, I mean, just as a quick question for me, to what extent have you like really immersed yourself with some of these AI tools for generating designs or even images or video?
I'm starting to use it a lot more. Like there was some chat that posted in the JSC about getting feedback, like the review prompts for writing your LinkedIn resume. And I did some of it, but then I ran out of free chats.
Okay,
So,
yeah. Yeah, I think the people that are going to stick out in design are folks that are quite versed in Midjourney, Sora, those tools to really, yeah. Anyway, just my 2 cents, but
okay, thank you.
yeah, sure.
Hey, I was gonna just add to that. The only time I change my resume is to match the job description. Because I'm in program management, product operations. I stopped applying to technical program managers, but I'll change the top of my resume to match what the company is looking for. And then maybe change 1 or 2 bullets underneath. But I don't have two vastly different. We should always be changing our resumes to match the job description anyway, I think, but that doesn't mean you have a whole new resume.
Okay,
That's my
so
opinion. Yeah.
okay, so you basically update the job title to what you're applying to, and then a couple keywords you throw in there from the description.
Yeah, like I print out like the ones I really want, I'll print out the job description, what they post, and then highlight the 3 things I want to highlight on my resume. And so I'll adapt my resume to it, but the form and the look and feel is the exact same. The
Okay,
title of all my previous jobs are the same.
okay.
So.
Mm.
Mhm.
Any other
So,
questions out there? Situations, observations?
Eric Ram here. Adding
Yeah.
to what Alex and Anne Marie were discussing, how do we know? Kind of slight pivot there. How do we know which skills are getting hired? Because the ads themselves do not necessarily mean that the companies are actually hiring them in a immediate time frame, right? So how do we know that
How do you know what skills are
actually being
they're
hired?
actually,
Being hired, yeah. So that way, even in terms of candidate market fit, if you say, okay, I can be A or B or C, but if A is completely dead, how do we know that it is dead? Otherwise, we are just barking at the wrong tree all the time.
yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, my initial thought would be if, as you survey the job postings, you'll probably see by volume, what different companies are hiring for in terms of their skills. Um, what is your thought, Ram, in terms of how to approach that?
Yeah, that statement that you said is the one that I'm parsing. Just because
Yeah.
there are ads does not mean they're hiring. What I'm observing is there's a lot of kind of non-serious advertisements, right? They're not necessarily hiring in the immediate time frame, or maybe they may never hire. They just say, oh, we put the job on hold or whatever. It's so for what reason, God knows. They're gathering resumes, maybe who knows what. It could be an internal transfer, maybe. So then there's no point in saying, okay, I want to look for UX role or UI role if nobody's hiring. I mean, UX is just a random skill I mentioned, but
Yeah, I think what you're suggesting, Ram, is it's an important suggestion here because there are companies that there is such thing as fake job postings. or they're stale, but they still leave them out there even though they're not actively hiring for them. And how do you get around that? I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, if something's been out there for a long time, depending on the size of the company, it may be an evergreen job description, right? If the company is 5,000 person company and they're always hiring because they're dealing with attrition for their 200 person software development team, then they might have an evergreen post that's just been out there forever just to deal with their natural attrition. And so, but if you're looking at a small company, you know, whatever, 30 people, 50 people, and you see the equivalent of an evergreen job description that's been out forever, maybe that's more questionable, right? Because why haven't they filled that position yet, right? And so you probably have to read between the lines a little bit. You know, and ideally, if you're able to find somebody that works at that company, you can get inside information, but that's a whole networking exercise that you have to kind of, you know, it takes time to do that.
Isn't there any process where they have to report to the Department of Labor that, hey, we hired so many the last month or last quarter? Well, quarter is too long, but so that we can know the actual numbers for actual positions coming from a state department.
That's a good question. I don't know. That might be a state by state thing. Yeah, I'm not sure on
And
that.
I don't know if companies have to report that, like that all just comes out in their financial information. I'm guessing those types of information would come out of like an ADP or those kinds of surveys in terms of payroll counts. I don't know if companies have to report frequently. Like I don't
Yeah,
think
I'm not a.
here.
Yeah, in my experience, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, most of my experience has been in Utah and California, West Coast. Yeah. And so, yeah.
I have a
Hey, Eric.
question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was late, but it was my question was the recruiters, how do you treat referrals from people? Because if you already
Oh, yeah.
covered
Was
that,
that your,
I was late, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
was that your question? Was that your question,
Yeah,
Alex?
that was my question. So I've gotten a couple of recruiters, and I've turned down one role, and I've offered up additional candidates who I genuinely think would be a better fit than me. How do you
Yeah.
guys deal with those? Because I've done this another time and they totally ghosted my people. Like they just never contacted them, which is totally fine. But yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah. I answered this question earlier on, but I see that
Okay. And you know what? Please don't
it's
spend more time on it then.
yeah. Again, I answered it from my perspective. I always look for someone like I take the referral seriously, especially if
Okay.
I hold the person that I reached out to in high regard. I'll take the referral seriously and I'll reach out. But it really depends on the recruiter, right? It also depends on, you know, maybe the credibility you might have with that recruiter or what they see in you. So, you know, if you're a long shot because there's some mismatch in skills or experience, and you're referring someone else that's you know sort of on par with your capabilities, your skills, or experience, then they might not reach out to that person, right? But if they think you're the perfect fit, you know, then they might take your referral more seriously. So,
Great, thanks.
yeah, and I'm recording these too, you guys. So I'll post this on YouTube, and you know, you guys can have access to it.
Okay.
Any other questions out there, or ideas, or thoughts, or
I have a question.
yeah,
You mentioned I'm also a product designer. And so I actually am pretty well versed at the various AI tools. But what do you think that designer is called? Like when looking at job descriptions, because I feel like it's been called anything. And sometimes it's product designer with AI skills, but sometimes it's not. And so it's really hard to find those jobs because that's the job I want.
your guess is as good as mine because this thing is moving so fast, right? And what a designer was on the hook for maybe a year and a half ago is different now, right? And what a designer can do single-handedly with these tools is amazing. And so I mean, this is me speculating based on what I've seen and what I've surveyed, but I think the astute companies will increasingly value their employees' ability to leverage generative AI and these generative AI enabled tools to increase their capacity. And so, whatever that may be called, I'm not entirely sure, but you might want to make sure that as you're coming up to speed in your proficiency with these tools, you somehow cite that or reference that in your resume and your LinkedIn profile, right? Because I think only increasingly employers will begin to look more and more for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What is your feedback on like the easy apply on LinkedIn?
Easy apply.
Yeah.
It's like the Staples easy button. It's creating all kinds of havoc, right? Because you have basically, the easier it is for people to apply, it just creates more noise for the employer side. And it also demoralizes, the candidate that genuinely thinks they're the right fit for this company. They read the job description, they research the company, and they're like, yeah, I'd be a really great fit for this. And meanwhile, you have people that are not great fit, and they're just hitting pop, 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 apply, apply, apply. So it creates a problem for everyone, right? And then, yeah, so I mean, if you feel like it's a legitimate opportunity and you're a great fit, I would definitely apply, but I wouldn't leave it at that. You'd have to basically be your own advocate, your own recruiter. You have to promote yourself. You try to use LinkedIn as sort of your LinkedIn profile in ways where you can take your profile and sort of make it sort of a beacon, right? Where you'll start to attract the people that you want to connect with, whether it's for networking purposes or for specific employment purposes. But having a distinct sort of beacon for what your LinkedIn profile and what you stand for, I think is a sound strategy. I think what you don't want to do is have your LinkedIn profile be so, how do you say, just so general that you're not really standing out as a beacon for one thing. That makes sense. And I know that's not easy either, because sometimes it's hard to say no to certain things, right? But that's a judgment call you'll have to make in terms of how you define those boundaries.
Okay.
Is there such a thing called the hidden job market? Apologies if this was answered in a previous Zoom session. In my experience, yes, there is such thing as a hidden job market. When a team or an organization knows that they're going to have to expand their team, usually they try to figure out how to do that internally. And the next step would be, does anyone on the team know anyone? And then once that's exhausted, it's like, okay, maybe we can put up a job description. Let's see what the outcomes of that are. And then maybe after all that's sort of exhausted, they'll be like, okay, maybe we need to engage a third-party recruiter. But yeah, I would argue that I've seen it a lot. I mean, think about it from your own experience, right? The teams that you've worked on. If there was an opening, or I mean, a lot of times you'll know that there's going to be a need for an additional headcount on your team. And so you don't just go from there to engaging a third-party recruiter. Usually there's some discussion around what this role is going to look like. The hiring manager will define a requisition and they'll work that through either HR or finance to get that approved. And that doesn't happen overnight. And so there's this period where there's nothing posted, but the team is like either thinking about it or they're actively looking for somebody to fill that spot. And how can you get out ahead of that? Well, I mean, going back to that sort of LinkedIn beacon strategy, right? If you are furthering your personal brand as somebody that is specialized in this or that domain or this or that industry, you're creating thoughtful content around it, then chances are that person, you might be top of mind with that hiring manager, that team member that's thinking about, how are we going to find somebody for our team, even before it becomes a job posting on Indeed or LinkedIn. So yeah, I think I've seen firsthand there is a hidden job market. So. Resume versus LinkedIn profile, do you make them the same or do you need to have different content? So generally speaking, the resume in my experience, is quite tailored to the specific job that you're applying for, whereas your LinkedIn profile is something that's a bit more general, gives sort of a kind of a holistic picture of who you are. And as a recruiter, that's generally what I look for in a resume. I look for it to be tailored for the specific role, and then I'll jump over to LinkedIn to get more of a holistic picture of the person. You know, I'll look at I mean, you want your resume and your LinkedIn profile to be consistent. If you start using things like, obviously, if you have different dates of tenure or different companies or different titles, that could be quite confusing to the reader. And so that's something that you might want to more or less synchronize. But in terms of the actual accomplishments, I mean, that's an area where you can kind of deviate a little bit, where LinkedIn could be a little bit more general and the resume could be much more focused or tailored to the particular position that you're going after. And feel free, you guys, you know, if you guys have any insight or if you want to build on this, you know, I think we can all benefit from everyone's insight. You know, I have some experience, but I don't claim to be sort of the all-knowing person with respect to every angle. So. And by the way, I mean, there's been a handful of folks that have like donated to my coffee fund. I really appreciate that. You know, it really makes me happy that, you know, someone is recognizing that, or I feel like I'm able to provide some value to someone to the extent that they would bust out their credit card and Venmo me a few bucks, you know, feels really good. I appreciate that. Not expected, definitely not expected, but yeah. What other questions, thoughts, ideas, challenges?
I'll jump in with a question, and forgive if this has been answered already. I joined a little bit late. As a recruiter, you're reviewing somebody's resume or LinkedIn, right? And you're probably giving, how much time do you give it at first glance? And what are you looking to have jump out at you? Like, what's the thing that's actually going to make you pause and spend more time than like the initial 10 to 20 seconds you're probably giving at first glance to somebody's resume?
That's a good question. So one thing that I look for, okay, so sort of the mindset is this: if I'm a recruiter and I have typically anywhere from 5 to maybe even 10 requisitions that I'm handling, I'm driving, I'm screening all the resumes, I'm shepherding the candidates through the process, it's a huge workload, right? Especially now, a lot of teams are downsizing the recruiting teams. And so the mindset is, okay, I'm going to go through this stack of 100 or 200 or even 300 resumes. And I'll spend maybe an hour at a time just cranking through how many I can get through. And so what I'm looking for in the resume is, it depends on the client, right? For example, if they're looking for someone to work remote, I will be okay with somebody that's out of state. But if they're looking for somebody here in the state that the client is in, then I see somebody that's out of state, I'll be very quick to, you know, unless it says I'm open to relocation. But even then, you know, the first pass is like any reason to disqualify someone is generally what happens. And that even equates to like typos, right? If somebody sees a typo, a lot of times in that first pass, recruiters are looking for a way to disqualify someone. So don't give them any excuse to disqualify you. And so generally what I look for beyond that is title progression. So I like to know that the person has a trajectory. I look for, and again, keep in mind the context here. Most of the recruiting I've done has been with growth companies, startup and tech-enabled growth companies. And so I've been conditioned to kind of look for a certain profile, and that profile is somebody with a title progression, right? Not necessarily somebody that's plateaued and has been doing the same thing for the past 10 years. So I'm looking for title progression. I'm looking for any gaps or any sort of pivots in their career, and I make note of that. And it's not necessarily to disqualify somebody. The pivots can be really interesting, right? In terms of why somebody pivoted from one role or from one industry or from one career to the next. And it's not necessarily a disqualifier for me. Now, if I know something about what the hiring manager is looking for, and maybe we had a few conversations, or maybe we had a candidate that's gone through and the person has pivoted, and I know the hiring manager, they just don't like, they're just not keen on somebody that's pivoted their career for whatever reason. And that's beyond my pay grade as a recruiter. I have to kind of conform with what the hiring manager is looking for. Now, in some cases, hiring manager might have their own opinion. And if I think that's going to impede his ability or her ability to conduct an effective search, I will try to make a case for why they should reconsider, how they're thinking about it. But that doesn't always happen. So sometimes, whatever comes from on high from the recruiting manager is just that the recruiter just becomes sort of eyes and ears for whatever they're dictating. But you don't necessarily know what's going to happen with that. But anyway, me as a recruiter, title progression, I look for gaps, I look for pivots, I look for where the person is. I try to look for whether they're currently employed. And a lot of that, again, it depends on sort of the directives from the hiring manager and what I know the team is looking for. Trying to think what else. I try to avoid, if your resume is full of superlatives, it's quite distracting. I'm not saying don't use any superlatives, but if every other word is a superlative on how great and how you're the best and how this and that, it becomes very noisy, and the reader becomes numb to what you're saying. So I would use superlatives sparingly, and I would try to rely more on the facts. You all know how to write an achievement bullet point, right? You have to quantify it, and that's factual, right? Saying you're the best salesperson, it doesn't hold as much weight as, you were the top salesperson increasing by revenue by whatever X percentage among a group of 50 other sales folks, right? That's quantitative, and you want to focus on quantitative. Does that help? I'm sorry, who asked the question? Was that you, Sandra?
No, it was me. Yeah.
Wendy? Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anyone else? How's all your searches going? Is it any sort of feedback or?
I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure. Is that Tim?
So what you just said about quantifying, in my role, I'm a UX researcher. It's quite difficult to quantify, what I do, because attribution is a problem. I can't necessarily say we sold more because I, did some research and I found out exactly what users need to have, and then, we did it and we sold it. Attribution is a problem. So what's your suggestion on bullet points that you can't quantify?
So one approach where it's difficult or challenging to attribute to, a revenue or a cost metric, you can index on, for example, in your role, if you are producing XYZ within XYZ or ABC time, that could be one way to quantify, right? So if you look at what you're on the hook for producing, and you can tie that to some sort of time or quantity measure, that could be one way to do it. And sometimes it's not so much about the actual number, but the fact that you went through a process to think deeply about that. As a recruiter reading it goes far, it stands out. So, and you can use ChatGPT to just describe the problem that you described, and it'll give you some ideas on how you can quantify, right? But it gives some measure, right? It gives a signal to the reader that you are sort of KPI or metric oriented. So I hope that helps, Tim.
Yeah, and you're not necessarily saying that every bullet point needs to be quantified, right?
No, not necessarily, right? But ideally, you can quantify it to some degree, right? Or at least be able to compare, relatively speaking, or qualitatively speaking, so sort of the magnitude or the impact of your contributions. May I ask, Tim, like what role do you
UX.
play, or what
UX research.
UX research? So maybe there's a time component to your ability to research, a given task.
Right.
Improvements are always interesting. Where you were a year ago or 2 years ago, and the improvement you've made on your ability to, produce research. I mean, do you use ChatGPT or any of these LLMs to help with your research?
It's so new that I haven't necessarily found a good way to use it necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, it's almost 5 months old at this point. So
Did you say ChatGPT is 5 months old?
yeah, I mean, it came out in November of last year.
November 2022, I believe. But yeah, it's been around, and anyway, yeah, I found it to be really helpful for some of these questions, because it's actually pretty creative, especially now with this 4.40. But anyone have any other questions? I see a question here from Sandra. How can a job seeker best connect with legit recruiters? Sandra's still here? Yeah, Sandra's here. Yeah, finding a good recruiter it can be challenging. I mean, some thoughts here is you need to find a recruiter that works in your domain, your area, your industry. Ideally, somebody that works geographically close to you, that would be familiar with companies that are in your geographical location would be ideal. And then ideally, somebody that's more senior, right? Somebody that has typically a senior recruiter will have line of sight to the hiring manager, whereas folks that are more entry level, they're doing a lot of the screening, but they may have directives or guidance from a senior recruiter, but they may not have direct line of sight to the actual hiring authorities. So ideally, somebody that's more senior. And then you have that balance of working with a recruiter that's a third-party recruiter, which is my experience, or an in-house recruiter. In-house recruiters are a bit more narrow because they're more concerned with they're more concerned with the company that they're working for and hiring for that company. Third-party recruiters, they may have more of a breadth of insight across the hiring, across a given industry. So, and there's a whole thing you can do is you network with some of these recruiters, and just know that recruiters right now, like a lot of them are inundated. So they may not get back to you, and try not to take it personally. But the other thing too is that this whole thing is a cycle, right? It's a cycle that swings back and forth. Right now, the cycle is such that the employers have all the leverage, and there's a lot of great talent out there, an abundance of great talent out there, and that'll swing back at some point where the talent market has the leverage. It's just natural. It just goes back and forth. And so when you get back to that time where all the candidates have the talent market has the leverage, that's a great time to start building relationships with key recruiters, kind of when you don't need them, so to speak, right? So just some thoughts there, Sandra. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Yeah. So thank you all for joining here. I hope it's helpful. Yeah, let me know if there's anything I can help with. Yeah, I do this every week. And if anyone joins that free workshop with Gaurav, I'd love to hear more about any feedback that you might have. I haven't had a chance to sit in his workshop, but I'll probably do it. I'll probably do so for that same one. But would love to hear you guys' input, and I hope to see you guys next week and on a weekly basis. As needed, share this with your JSC and your friends, whatnot. It's not limited to folks that are part of NSA. So anyway, that's all I've got for today.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to attend the meeting, so I'll definitely fill you in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate
All right.
you.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.